Support for the podcast comes from Dr. Lana Shapiro, a developmental and behavioral pediatrician with over 10 years of clinical and research experience in leading medical centers such as the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and extensive experience in the field. She brings both personal and professional experience to approach each child and family holistically. Dr. Shapiro specializes in the early diagnosis of autism and managing the developmental and behavioral concerns of medically complex children. She provides comprehensive evaluations and tailored treatment plans for children and adolescents with developmental and behavioral differences, including medication management and educational advocacy. Learn more at lanashapiro.com. That's LANASCHAPIRO.com. Hello again, and welcome to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I'm your host, Erica Desper, founder of the Center for Confident Parenting and a mom who seemed to learn everything I needed to know the hard way. My guest today is Casey Schmalaker. Hopefully I did that right. Vice President at New Frontiers Executive Function Coaching, who supports clients starting as early as age 5 or well into the golden years to learn how they learn best and lay the foundations for success. New Frontiers' overarching goal is to help people to develop problem-solving skills, a growth mindset, grit and resilience, and independence. I love that. Casey, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I was so confident about pronouncing your name, and then I kind of lost it when I hit record.
It's a lot of consonants in a row.
It is, and I've had a really long day. Awesome. Well, I'm very happy to talk with you because the things we're going to talk about are near and dear to my heart because they are a struggle for my own kiddo. But first, tell us about yourself, a little bit, what brought you to this work. Who are you?
Great. So I've definitely had a very interesting journey getting into this. I started off, it goes all the way back into high school while everyone else was doing driver's ed, getting their cars and stuff. I didn't come from a family of means, so I was tutoring and I started tutoring a student with ADHD and then a separate, I had big hopes and dreams when I went to college. I was going to change the world, government and law, economics. But when I graduated, I was lucky enough to have like a full ride. And I was like, I don't want to take out more loans. I don't want to go to grad school right now. And so I looked at my resume and what was my experience? And it was tutoring. And I was blessed over 11 years ago now. I found New Frontiers. They had just started a couple of months before. And I got into coaching. Like I was kind of just thrown into the deep end of working with people with various diagnoses, autism, ADHD, NVLD before it really was even a label. And I look at my mentor, who's still my boss and partner in crime for 11 years. I was blessed to get learning through just one-on-one case studies. And it really informed a lot of my development as a professional and understanding executive functions that everyone's different. I didn't approach this learning through a textbook and what were these and what were the symptoms. It's very different to learn about slow processing speed in a book and then see it. And so I still carry this to my day, to today. And when I'm helping people learn to coach, go in humbly. You never know. Every new person is a new experience, a new learning opportunity. And I really carry that forward to this day that while you might see some patterns, it's just a pattern. It's not the same thing. And I really do approach that philosophy of everyone being different. And to this day, I've grown with the company over the 11 years, but to this day, I won't give up the coaching. While I'm doing a lot of other executive level stuff, I'm still very protective of my caseload and keeping me grounded.
It must speak to how much you love it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but I work with parents whose children have trouble sleeping or getting through the potty training process. And I tell those parents all the time, babies and children, they don't always fit into the boxes that I want to put them in when I answer a question, generically. They're teaching me things all the time where, humans are just so complicated and unique and intricate. So it's nice that you really bring that perspective to the coaching. That's great. So let's talk about learning differences and diagnoses. My audience probably knows this by now, but I have a teenage son, and we're on a very long, grueling journey of getting him adequately assessed and diagnosed and supported. And he has a math-specific learning disability. He has dysgraphia. He has ADHD. He has autism. He has anxiety. He has OCD. We're collecting a laundry list of labels. Personally, for me, because it took us so long to get those labels and because they were so integral to getting him supported in school, and it's just us as parents understanding, like, is he having a hard time? Is he giving us a hard time? Like, what's going on here? I was excited to get all the labels. That's not to say that, there's obviously downsides to a lot of things, but I feel like I was maybe an outlier in that I think most parents are a little bit concerned that if they if they give their child a label, it will become their identity, and how other people perceive them. It will become a crutch, maybe in terms of how the child, I know when my son first learned his diagnoses, he would be doing something irritating and I would call him out and he'd be like, well, I have ADHD. So, I was like, whoa, no, that's not excuse. That's something we need to work through. So if a parent is sort of that mindset and they're wrestling with that concern about labels, what would you say to them from your experience?
So it's exploring the gray, right? And sometimes we try to be in black and white thinking, one or the other, because it feels simpler and more efficient. Diagnoses serve a purpose. You can't receive additional services without a diagnosis, whether that be through school, or even if that goes on into the future, into the workforce. Like, there are certain rights that come with diagnoses. I sometimes joke about this. I can be very humorous about these things while being empathetic, but I often say, like, diagnoses are really useful for insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies.
For
Like,
real.
that is easy. And it serves a purpose. It can sometimes really help with, there's not just something wrong with me, there's other people that struggle with this.
Yes.
But too far to the other end of it, of playing devil's advocate, is then how we as people use the diagnoses when it's not for this outward aspect. And so a diagnosis is half the job, maybe even only 25%. I don't want to quote the exact numbers, but if you did math, permutations and stuff, for anyone that knows how diagnoses are given, it's a set, like ADHD I'll use. There's a set of 9, I believe, in the first list of symptoms. And then there's a second set of 9. And in each set, if you have at least 5 of them, and that's how you get the diagnosis. That's the standards. Last time I did it, I could be wrong, but I think there's something like 200,000 plus different permutations of these symptoms. So when I'm talking with people, I'm like, great, ADHD. Which of those 200,000? Right? Our job's not done. And so when you get the diagnosis, it's not okay, it's solved. It's which symptoms are impacting me. The other reason why this is so important is it really helps you focus. Like, sometimes we just say this saying, oh, well, it comes with strengths too. But we just say it. But if you focus on how is this manifesting in my brain, you can list out the pros and the cons, or the challenges that come with it. The other thing, symptoms, the reason why I focus so much on the symptoms, and it can almost be like a shortcut. Okay, ADHD. Now I know what symptoms to look for, as opposed to I'm just guessing. But once you focus more on symptoms and how it's actually forming, you can start identifying and going into problem solving. So I love the example you brought about your son saying, I have ADHD, that's why. I distinctly remember one student that I went through the conversation. Okay, you didn't do the homework last night. What happened? It was my ADHD. I go, well, I guess my job's done. There's nothing I can do about that,
Right.
right? I can't change that. And then he was like, what? That's your job. I'm like, okay, let's dive a little more then. I go, where were you trying to do your homework? In my bedroom. Okay. Is there a TV in your bedroom?
Mm.
Yes. Was the TV on? Yes. What was on the TV? The NBA finals. I go, do you like basketball? Yes. Do you think that was a little distracting? Yes. Okay, let's start again. Why didn't you get the homework done?
Right.
I was distracted by the TV. I set myself up to be distracted.
Right.
It empowers, it gives them agency. A diagnosis, there's no agency. Someone else comes in, puts you through some tests, does some assessment, gives you this label. And in that sense, it's a label. But when you dive into it, it's now not like, it's not just the umbrella term that everyone fits under. It's who am I in this? So it helps empower them. So my words of advice to the parents are try to make this into a positive journey. And this is where it's the parent's responsibility to guide through that a bit. And when there's some nervousness, I sometimes hear from parents a little bit of projection. My kids won't be able to handle it. And so what I often say is try to educate yourself on this. How will you navigate through this? What purpose is the diagnosis serving? And then how can we make this more of an empowering aspect that's giving them more agency and control over their lives? Because once they hit those 11 years old, 12 years old, what starts to happen is kids need help, but don't want it because they want to be independent. And if we can start empowering them early, then you can prevent these defense mechanisms that can make it even harder and harder to get in there because they hide more. And really, what's
That's true.
humbling is the only way you know how it's manifesting and how it's impacting them is if they share what's in here. And if they feel that it's something to hide or something that's stigmatizing and not in a positive sense, a lot of my work with people when they come to me when they're like 18, 19 is undoing a lot of this and saying your thoughts and your feelings aren't wrong. This is how we can empower and take control over our lives again.
And I mean, we know in the world, we need these people who think differently and perceive things differently. Like they're the change makers, right? But in the school years when everything is so standardized and measured, it can definitely be challenging. And we personally encountered what you were just saying, where, you know, my son was in elementary school in brick and mortar, and it was clearly not the right fit, and they had not thoroughly assessed him, and so they weren't adequately supporting him. And then before I had really a chance to fight about that, COVID hit, and no one knew what was going on or what was going to happen next. And we thought it would be this cute little, 2-week thing, and here we go, it's years. So we took that as an opportunity to put him in a stable virtual program and kind of observe like what's this disconnect that only we seem to notice as parents. Unfortunately, COVID lasted so long that we stayed in that virtual setting, which really was not ideal. And he, just to survive and sort of dig out and tread water, he was entirely dependent on us to stay organized and all the things, task initiation, motivation, all of that, which at the moment it was really all we could do because we didn't know what we were dealing with. But you're right. Now that he's hit the older ages, whereas he was more than happy to take my help before, it kind of kept him regulated and kept him above water. Now he doesn't want it because it's embarrassing or takes the agency away or whatever the rationale is. So he's really, really struggling because we didn't have a chance to equip him. to do things independently or think about how he thinks. So yes, if parents have younger kids, I would say the earlier you can intervene and address this, and ideally it's not maybe the parent doing it. I feel like it has to come from someone else because kids do not want to learn from their parents. The better.
And it's so important that that's natural. That's human.
Sure.
And so parents' role is to save their kids biologically. It 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 hurts to see your kids
It
struggle,
really does.
but the reverse is that biologically they want you to think they're okay. They don't want you to see their suffering because they're suffering. Or
Right.
let's tone it down, not suffering. Their struggle.
No, we were suffering, but yes, let's say struggling.
Yeah. So let's say struggling because that's natural to want to try and work through it. But when there's learning differences, they don't have the tools to work through the problems. And it can be something as simple as self-advocacy. They don't know how to ask for help. So even if they want to, they don't know who else to. So why are parents in the role to constantly be imposing the help? Because they see it all the time. And so their instinct is save, 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 remove the stress, let's save them, like they're getting in their own way. And then the kid's instinct is to push away. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. Don't worry. Because that's causing struggle for you. And it just creates an unhealthy dynamic sometimes
Yes,
of
absolutely.
everyone has the best intentions, but it's like a secretary yelling at their boss. It's not
Right.
appropriate. It's not healthy. No one's moving forward with it.
Yes, it's like you're in my house. And I'll also say for parents who are listening, he masked and overcompensated because he has a ton of strengths, like you said. His strengths. I remember asking the neuropsychologist last year, like, how did we get here? Meaning, how did he get so far with no one seeing what we were seeing and thinking we were just being like crazy parents? And she was like, it's his strengths. He really, really relied on those, and he overcompensated for whatever word you'd want to use, his weaknesses, deficits, his challenges. However, when he got to middle school, 6th grade, that became next to impossible because the work became more complex. You now have to change rooms. So you're dealing with multiple teachers and you have to bring your stuff from room to room. And it was like all of a sudden even more of a nightmare. So I know parents often wonder, like, well, is it age related? Are they just going to grow out of it? And I'm sure there's some measure of that, but it really could actually get a little harder just because of the complexity of life and learning and all that.
And that's such an important point, and you even brought it up earlier. It's important to separate out compensatory supports versus long-term skill development. Confidence is like the core to growth. Being confident that you're going to be okay, you're going to move forward, and this is a learning journey. Um, when they start encountering those failures, like I use this as a rule of thumb. It's not like exact science, but when there's learning differences, assume some of that maturity and some of the development of these higher order cognitive skills. It can be like up to 4 years delayed.
Right.
And it helps frame for parents, okay, I have a 14-year-old, but would I place the same expectations on a 10-year-old?
Right.
No, I wouldn't, right? And it's not that they are a 10-year-old, but some of the society's expectations on how school moves forward doesn't stop for learning differences. And so when you're dealing with a middle schooler, you don't want them to fail, 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 because then they will just crumble. Their confidence will crumble. And so you do need to be compensatory to allow the brain to catch up in some areas.
Right.
So it's picking and choosing your battles.
Right.
As a coach, if there's an essay due tomorrow, I'm not going to sit there and focus on how do you write the perfect essay. I'm going to help them write that essay and make it a learning lesson for maybe we should start earlier next time instead of
Right.
rushing at the end. But I'm not going to let them fail because that's going to carry with them and that's going to have a worse impact on their
Right.
confidence.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, why is, whether you have a learning difference or not, I think this can apply to everyone, but correct me if I'm wrong. Why is learning how you learn, and you can tell us what the fancy word is for that, why is it so important for each of us, and especially anyone who happens to have a learning difference?
So the fancy term is metacognition. Learning how to learn is something, I'll use the neurotypical word, but it's learned implicitly through trial and error. Um, like that old saying, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. So when going through school, we study one way, it didn't work, we get a bad grade, we adapt. And the way we adapt is through a lot of implicit learning of how did someone else do it? Would that work for me? We're asking 30,000 questions in our head to solve this problem of how do I set it up better for myself? People with learning differences do not learn as well implicitly. They learn more explicitly. So when we say learning how to learn, what we're really saying is let's make this an actual process, right? You wouldn't just say to someone, hey, here's an algebra problem, teach yourself how to do it. We would explicitly teach how to do it. And so this is where there's such a struggle, but where it does broaden to everyone and why it's so important is this executive function of cognitive flexibility. Not getting too, I'm not a neuroscientist, but like
But
neuroplasticity
I
and
bet
how
you wish you were.
I I wanted to be a neurosurgeon growing up, but my hands tremor a little bit. So I was like, that's out the window. I'm
That's
never
it.
going to do that. I work with some adults too. And I ask them, what is the best way to approach this problem for you? And even they sometimes struggle with it because they're not asked it explicitly. So when they encounter a problem and they don't have a toolkit, if you lack this metacognition, you struggle to adapt. And so through the lifespan, when you're in a status quo, the same thing's happening and you want to change it, you need your metacognition. You need to be able to say, well, what else can I do? How can I enhance this? Preview, might that work? When we talk about learning styles, am I a visual learner? Am I auditory? Am I kinesthetic? That is like the most preliminary of metacognition. And so it just helps inform everything in how we approach things. So just to go back to the student example, learning how to learn, great. My teacher gave me a Quizlet that I can study. I'm going to listen to my teacher. That's not using metacognition. Now, I personally am not a fan of Quizlet. I find in my metacognition, the writing down, the physical movement of index cards works much better than the digital version of it. But a student that doesn't even ask themselves that question, is this the best way for me to study? They will just use the Quizlet. Versus someone that maybe starts asking these questions, they might say, thanks for the Quizlet, but I'm going to do it this way because that's what works for me. And so when working on this, it all comes down to it's a process of cognitive modeling. Just ask questions. So I started off this kind of winded answer, but we're asking and prompting ourselves with self-talk throughout our entire days. People with learning differences need to learn those questions. And the best way to learn them is hearing someone else. I often joke there's hundreds of people out there. What would Casey say in this situation? But really, they're just using their metacognition to ask themselves these prompts and move forward. And I think the more important part to really tie this to is practicing what you preach. So as a parent, do the same thing. Model your own metacognition. Show that you struggle with some of these questions and figuring out the right answers for yourself. Oh, I know they want me to do it this way, but that won't work for me. What if I tried it this way? Think out loud. And then you're helping them see that it's okay. It's not always the right answer that someone else gives you.
That's great, and we'll come back to that modeling in a little bit. Yeah, I've been known to say that my son thinks in his own language, and what I mean by that is we could explain something until we're blue in the face, but until we explain it in the way he needs to hear it with the words he needs to hear, you're like beating your head against a wall. And if you, when we didn't know that there was a learning difference, we really just thought he was being a pain in the rear. But now we kind of know that this is a pattern of his, and we'll just be like, well, how else could we, how else could we say this? And I can just think of when we first taught him how to ski, the morning started just horrendous. I didn't really know how to ski. My husband did. He thought like, oh, you don't need lessons. I'll just teach him. And we were over bundled. We were sweating like it's really awful. We were still at the top of the mountain, like an hour in. Um, and then I don't know, I like got frustrated and mad, and I just like switched up how we had been saying it. And he literally went like, oh, and flew down the mountain. And the rest of the day was like a dream. And I could like, if
Yep.
you didn't see that happen, it would be so hard to believe. I wish I could like have it recorded to show everyone. It was just such a great example. It was like just a prime example of how he learns differently. And I just thought, like, how
And I
frustrating must that be for him? It's like everyone's speaking a language he can't understand.
and that's why I think it's so like that goes to like one of the core skills to work on is helping them learn to say when something's not working for them. Help them learn to advocate because too often it's a one-way street. It's the parents trying to adapt, constantly adapt, constantly adapt. How am I presenting it? As a coach, my first thing is to get them to be partners on the journey. I don't know what's going on in your head. I need your help in order to help you. And when you can start giving them that language of, it's okay to say to me, that doesn't make sense. Can you try differently? That's okay. Because that is some of the kids' baggage as well. Kids think parents are perfect.
Right.
So being able to get the okay to tell me, like, no, the way you're explaining it doesn't work for me. Can you try a different way? Now you're working together on it rather than like pulling teeth to figure out and see when the key finally fits.
Yes, yeah, I love that. So, how should we as parents, if we're worried about this label identity crutch issue, how do we talk to our kids about their learning differences? Like, how do we, let's say we get a diagnosis and everyone, I'm in all the Facebook groups and I see all the parents say, like, should I tell my child? How do I tell my child? Obviously, we did. We told him. Everyone makes their own choice. But assuming that you're having a discussion about this, what does that sound like?
So every kid's different. Parents know their kids. So how they will process it and where to start first is giving the title. Are they going to harp on this and is this really going to hurt their confidence? You might not want to start there. Or if it helps ground what future conversations are going to be, like gives purpose to them, then maybe you do start with, hey, there is this diagnosis. But to go back to what I said before, I think the focus really is on strengths and weaknesses. So when I'm coaching, I don't focus on a diagnosis unless someone wants to share it with me. I focus on what do you find challenging. Sometimes I use an example I use is I call it a magic wand question. If I gave
Okay.
you a magic wand, what's one thing you wish you could change? Make easier, make harder, or like just get rid of? What would that be? And then you start the conversation. Well, why do you find that difficult? Um, I think through the entire process, it's really important also to talk about your own weaknesses. I personally use a lot of self-deprecating humor myself. I make it okay to talk about these
So
things.
do I, and my therapist tells me not to. I'm working on it.
Yep. Um, but I try to make it a positive thing to talk about these things. Oh, this is so frustrating, right? I wish this was easier. And then you empower that. Great. let's try something. Might not work, but let's try it. Let's see if we can make it easier. Wouldn't that be amazing? And it's the journey together, the journey through this, understanding strengths, putting just as much weight on strengths, so that it's not just a focus on the negatives. But I would even you can use some visual aspects, like what I said before about the ADHD example. If this can manifest in so many different ways, you're still unique, you're still individual. But this at least is making our journey to figure out what works for you and what not. It's like we're getting a shortcut in the maze, right? But that it's a journey of growth. But I think the most important part about it is your brain type is unique to the point that it does have a label, right? There is something that there's a category of this type of brain, right? Now there's uniqueness in it, but my brain's unique, right? I don't have the benefit of a shortcut into figuring out my strengths and weaknesses,
Right.
because there isn't a label to give me that shortcut. But I think it's really important to help them see, isn't it helpful knowing that you get distracted easily? So, whereas your friends, if they're a little bit older, whereas your friends might be able to listen to music while doing homework, when you do that, it's not that you can't, but you're making your job harder. We're now empowering this for you. And really, I keep going back to it. Focus on how it's manifesting, because someone might have ADHD, and this is where the fear of like self-fulfilling prophecies come in. Just because you have ADHD doesn't mean you get distracted in the same ways. You might get distracted by your thoughts instead of stimuli. And so almost not putting so much stock in it. It's not super unique. Everyone has different brains, and then you're normalizing it. And so it's not this stigma to avoid, but it's a tool to help us figure out what works for us better and get to
Right.
that point quicker, as opposed to these hurdles that are insurmountable.
That's great. So you touched on earlier how just truly challenging it is to see your kids struggle and maybe fail, and I can certainly attest to that. But I know that you would also say that struggle is essential to children's growth. So why is that? And more importantly, why is it so hard for parents to let that happen and watch it happen?
So struggle's essential because I like to use this analogy. If you're walking down the street and a rock gets into your shoe, you struggle a little bit, so you take your shoe off and get rid of the rock. It
Mm,
changes your behavior, it informs it. Um, for an adult example, relatable for working parents, right? If you start to struggle with your workload and you're working late and you're not able to be home with family and have dinner and stuff, that struggle causes some stress. And it's just our body's alert to say, we need to change something.
mhm.
Struggle is often the first part of problem solving. There's something not going well that I'm struggling through that I need to adjust. Now, the second really important piece of this is as it ties to these terms of grit and resilience. Grit and resilience, through Angela Duckworth's work, buzzwords coming around, it is a high predictor of success, but you're not born with it. You build it up like a muscle. And so I'll share some, uh, let's say, an embarrassing fact about me. I
Oh,
am not
please.
very good with my fitness. I'm not. I have not been to the gym in years.
All
So
right.
now throw me into the gym, put me under a bench press, and let's see what will happen.
Okay.
I'm going to fail. It's going to fall on me. It's going to hurt. I'm going to be in more pain in that. Well, what happens when we send our kids, they go to middle school and they encounter stress or struggle? Now they go to high school. Now, oh, let's just ship them off to college, right? At a certain point, they're going to need some of that grit and resilience to push through struggle, learn from struggle, and then adapt.
Mhm.
And so, what I often say to parents is it's so hard to let your kids struggle, to go back to that biological factor. You don't want them to struggle. It's painful. It's
It
not
literally
natural.
makes me want to like claw my skin off.
And so what I've had to say to parents to try to balance that, because it's an instinct. It's
Mhm.
instinct. It's
Which means you have a
behavioral.
like almost a physiological reaction, like an instant
Exactly.
go
And
rescue. Yeah.
I totally make that a valid reaction. You are right, but let's label it for what it is. And then I use this phrase to tell parents to say over and over in their head, what's the worst that will happen to them if they struggle through this? And if I don't let them struggle, I am robbing them of a learning opportunity.
Mm.
So, what do I mean by that? Because that sounds abstract. What I mean by that is, here's an example. I had a student who was going up to Syracuse, going to college for the first time. He got his schedule. He had an 8-8. He was
I can already see
still
where this is going.
still 17, so dad still had access. He could talk to people at the campus, he could influence, he could change things. So I'm looking at his schedule, I see the 8 a.m., and the next day I look at his schedule, I'm like, oh, it's not there anymore. So I got on the phone with dad, and dad's like, yeah, I switched him out of it. He was never going to succeed in that. I was like, put him back in it right now. He wants the 8 a.m. First of all, he is about to be 18. He wants it. You are controlling things. It's not good. There's a whole other thing I can talk about parents involving themselves in accountability, but I got him to get back into the 8 a.m. because you know what? I had an 8 a.m. You know what never happened after I had that 8 a.m.? I made sure to register on time so I never took an 8 a.m. again, right? I went through the experience of taking a midterm exam at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, I'm never doing this to myself again. That student went through the 8 a.m. He did okay. It was a freshman year, first semester. Of course, there's going to be some struggle, but guess what? He never signed up for an 8 a.m. again. He had the learning experience. And again, remember, implicit learning versus explicit. He explicitly learned the struggle of an 8 a.m. And so he was able to inform his decision making because he learned from it.
Yeah.
But more so, he struggled through it, but he was okay. It wasn't the end of the world. It was a decision, and he was able to reap what he sowed and was able to admit that it was a mistake and then adjust. And when we jump in and remove these struggles, it's that term snowplow parents. It's like the updated helicopter parenting.
Yeah.
And so when we remove that struggle, we're removing them, flexing that muscle and building that muscle of grit and resilience. And I've seen some people, when they've had parents save everything for them. I'm working with a student now. He got rejected from an internship, didn't get an internship opportunity. We all know as adults, that's life. That it's a game of volume. You apply to a bunch of things. But throughout his life, internships were given, right? It was set up. There was no struggle through it. So now his reaction is warranted. It's rational. He's never experienced this. This feels like the worst thing in the world because he hasn't had the learning opportunities of it'll be okay. It's abstract. All it is us preaching. You'll be okay, but he doesn't actually know that. And so it's so hard for parents. That's why I say, just say to yourself, am I robbing them of a learning opportunity?
I think it's
You,
so helpful to do what you, for me, to do
yep,
what you said of like, what's the worst that will happen? Like as a high anxiety person who is medicated and in therapy and working on it, you catastrophize, right? Like, and especially, I mean, I want to speak to the parents whose kids really struggle with big emotions and they have meltdowns multiple times a day and it affects everybody else in the household. It just kind of feels like it ruins everything. I think that's another reason why we sometimes feel like we can't or shouldn't let our child struggle because we're anticipating that there's going to be this big blow up and everyone's going to have to recover. And honestly, I do pick my battles. For example, if I'm like, you know what, he's had a really good day so far and he forgot his lunch. And I'm going to be like, dude, I guess you'll remember your lunch next time. But if we've had like 7 things happen before we even get in the car on the way to school and he forgets his lunch, I'm probably going to Wawa to bring him some lunch because I feel like it's just going to snowball and he was kind of set up for failure anyway. So I think that maybe, we can kind of look for the opportunities, but also not be like total hard asses about it.
Yeah, it all goes back to that gray area, right?
Mhm.
Like it's often what I like to do is you present the ideal. So like what does this say? Like the old saying is like um practice makes perfect, but nobody's perfect, so why practice? Like that's the cynical view, right?
Right.
But if you have the ideal, then that's what you strive for. So not everything becomes excuse making, right? I'll just bring the lunch this time. I'll just bring the lunch this time. I'll just bring the lunch this time. Of course, there's going to be times, but this is what just the other saying to the parents is when there's problematic behaviors, reflecting, what role am I playing in this behavior? So just like the forgetting the lunch, the strategy might simply be, oh, let me just shoot a quick text to mom. That's my strategy. And I get lunch every day, right? That's my strategy. So what I try to say to parents sometimes is, are you the strategy? And if so, then that's problematic. But if you're just the problem solver for now and then issues, that's not a problem. Everyone has a bad day and maybe forgets lunch every now and then, but you're not the strategy. But once it becomes a pattern of behavior, it reinforces that behavior. And then now you're part of the behavior as opposed to their behaviors leading to those outcomes.
That's a really good distinction. I appreciate that. And just to go back, I feel like the simple explanation for everything you just said is the example of like you can tell your kids something's hot 12 times, but like the way that they'll remember it or whatever, like if they actually get near to touching it, it's just that's that like implicit versus explicit. I have the kind of kid that like has to find out for himself, and that used to drive me nuts. And he'd even go so far as to say, well, I didn't expect that to happen. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't expect that to happen? I told you if you did that, that was going to happen. But it's like he couldn't process it until he experienced it for himself and then doesn't forget after that. So you're
So
definitely
wait,
right.
wait until he starts driving. This is an
Right. Oh,
example.
I'm terrified.
Every parent this resonates with. Your first fender bender, the first
Mhm.
time now with phones and stuff, or the first time you go to change the music while you're in stop and go traffic and you bump into another car, it's gonna happen. That first time is going to happen. So with new drivers, you're like, when's it happening? When's it happening? There's no amount of you saying, don't get a fender bender, don't get a fender bender, always pay attention on the road. That doesn't sink in until
You're
it
too
happens.
close.
And then
Yeah.
it doesn't happen, right? Like
Yeah.
they learn from it. They get that stress, they
Yep.
work through it.
And that's a great example because better to have a very minor manageable fender bender than something, far more serious. So
Yeah,
that's the like
save them
what's the
every
worst.
time they're driving
Yeah.
and you prompt them every time, eyes on the road, eyes on the road, eyes on the road. And then you're not there prompting them. You're now
Right.
the strategy, right? Eyes on the
Right.
road. And then they get into a bad accident.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome. So your team focuses a lot on growth mindset. I feel like that's a bit of a buzzword too. But for anybody unfamiliar, how would you define growth mindset?
In the simplest terms, a growth mindset is that every struggle or poor outcome is a learning opportunity.
Mhm.
We can learn from it. The flip way that I say it to people sometimes is nothing is a failure if we can learn more about ourselves or
Mhm.
learn more about the world so that we're more informed moving forward. That's growth mindset in a nutshell. It's that you try something, there's some outcome, you learn from that outcome, and you grow moving forward. And so that is the positive reframing of struggle as learning opportunities. Now, you might need to teach how to learn, right? There are executive functions there, self-monitoring, reflecting. We always we use an acronym for problem solving called RISE, recognizing problems, identifying strategies, strategy implementation, and then evaluate effectiveness. That's that learning, that growth mindset. So the one thing that I like to always share over with parents is growth mindset isn't just about learning how to navigate the world, it's also tied to that metacognition and learning how to learn. You can learn more about ourselves too. And so there's just that dual aspect of, like, I just had a conversation today with a student. All right, that first exam in college was hard for you. Well, now you learned more about how your teacher gives exams. Great. You didn't have this info before. You didn't get a practice test. So now you know more. So even if you got a 75 or a 70 and you're not happy with it, guess what? 2 more exams in the semester and we now have more information. I've worked with this individual for a couple of years now. That would not have been the mindset before. Earlier would have been, oh my God, I did so badly. The teacher is just a hard teacher. It would have gone into all of these other either self-defeating lines of thoughts or blaming and not taking accountability. But by instilling the growth mindset, it really is that pick yourself up. What was the Chumbawamba song? I get knocked down, but I get up
Yes.
again. That's growth mindset.
Man, now that's going to be in my head all night.
There you go.
Thanks.
Cook dinner to it, right?
Yeah. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm no expert, but I believe the opposite of growth mindset is what we call fixed mindset. So the way I kind of think of this is like, it's the difference between I'm not good at this or I'm not good at this yet. Like, it's the belief that you can learn and grow and become, something you aren't already.
And that's the so just to tie this back even more to like the diagnoses and stuff, that is what the real problem that a lot of parents fear is: diagnosis plus fixed mindset, right? It's sometimes that assumption that there's a fixed mindset. But just like we believe everything can kind of be taught to people, growth mindsets can be taught, but not memorized. You have to live and breathe it. And it really, like, when you think of mindset, it really is about embodying this day in and day out, not just, hey, turn it on. And so there's struggle through it. My biggest piece of advice to parents is don't be black and white with this. There might be certain areas to give wins with a growth mindset to then help them generalize. But if you hear some fixed mindsets in some places, it's not shame on you, shame on you. They need the lived experience. Oh, I did grow from this and I did do better the next time. Maybe that can also happen in math. Maybe that can also happen over here. Like with the math learning disability you mentioned earlier, doesn't need to be generalized that math is always bad, but if we can build up confidence maybe in English and writing, then it can be, well, are we willing to try different approaches in math? Maybe something will stick. And what's the worst that can come with trying new things, right? What we're doing now isn't really working, so we might as well learn more about ourselves. But to sum that up, make learning positive. It's a positive experience. Doesn't mean there's not struggle, right? But it's positive. Think about it when someone goes on a marathon. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? They're not feeling very good when they're on like whatever number mile, right? But when they get there, then they feel really good in getting there. And so they're growing through this. It doesn't mean they feel positive throughout. You're allowed to feel crappy when something doesn't go how you thought it would. Right. But how do you react and adapt? That's where the growth mindset kicks in. And I just really, really emphasize that. No kid is going to want a parent coming in and be like, so what can you do different? What did you learn from this? How do we go forward? Sometimes they just want a parent that they can complain to and have a shoulder to lean on, not a coach all the time.
This reminds me, because I'm probably that parent. I took my son to have skateboarding lessons, and it was our first time at the facility, and they were very big on growth mindset, but we didn't know that yet. So they had a big poster on the wall, and he saw it before I did, and he went, ugh, Mom, you're going to love it here. You're into all that stuff. With so much disgust.
Yep.
They'll get there. So as I'd like to say recovering perfectionist, but I think I'm a perfectionist in progress. I know firsthand that a growth mindset is especially challenging for perfectionists. And you've mentioned over and over that, modeling from the parents is so key for all of this. So can you speak a bit about how parents can model imperfection and how seeing that modeled can nurture that growth mindset.
Yeah, and so just even before getting into the modeling, like I got a little chuckle out of you before when I was like, our kids see us as perfect. Like as parents, they see you as perfect. Doesn't mean they say it, right? They might
Right.
say the exact opposite, but they really do. You're the ideal adult in their world. You're what they know, and a lot of that is parents displaying that you have your crap together, right? Like I wake up in the morning, I have a routine, I go through all of this, I can make dinner, I can clean my room, I can do all of this. So what are they looking at? Someone that has it all together and I don't. What they don't see is how the sausage is made, right? So that could either be all the work that went into making those routines. I cleaned up my desk behind me because I didn't want it to look messy, but I'll show my students my messy desk. And I'll be like, you know why it doesn't look messy? Because I take 30 minutes a week to clean it up. Am I still messy? Am I still a slob sometimes? Yeah, I struggle through it. And so this is where it really connects with parents. Admit what you struggle with, right? Go through your thought processes. Admit what's difficult. My mom used to make it seem like she loved doing laundry. Like this is what I thought. She loves folding clothes. And
Nobody
then
does.
I'm sitting there, I'm like, why do I hate it so much? See, it's just easy for her because she loves it. I hate it. No, she did not like folding. It was not fun. And my journey in getting my laundry under control probably would have been a lot easier. She's like, yeah, I really suffer through doing this, but that's why I put on the TV, makes it more bearable. I'll be honest, until I was like 30 years old and COVID made me live in my home, I wasn't good with laundry. What changed? I started listening to like audiobooks and podcasts. I would have loved to hear my mom's strategies and how she struggled on this 20 years ago. But because she wanted to present this well put together and having everything under control. I want to be a role model. But the role model was not attainable. It wasn't real. The reality is this is a pain in my butt. Like, I don't want to be doing this. So how do I help myself do it? That's a modeling of, like, do you know, like, so much society nowadays, I don't want to do it. Well, that we got to do things we don't want to do sometimes. And the best people to start modeling that, and it's not just parents saying you have to do something you don't want to do. It's really saying, not in an emotional way, oh, I have all these chores to do today. I really don't want to do them. Maybe partner with them. Hey, do you mind coming along? Like, I could just use some like confidence boosting rather than how do a lot of parents do it? Hey, get in the car. You're coming with me to do these things. No, make it teamwork. Hey, I don't want to do all this stuff alone. I know you don't like food shopping. I don't like it that much easier. But if we did it together, I feel like it'd be more bearable. These are the things we expect our kids to do, but then we never show them how to do it. And so they can be partners in that. And this can really apply to so many different areas, cooking dinner, like everything, of just talking through it a bit, and admitting struggle, admitting what's difficult, talking through how you did it, because now you're teaching them multiple things by talking out loud. Grit and resilience, you're modeling it by showing them I'm pushing through something I don't want to do, right? You're helping model metacognition. Well, since I don't want to do this, I'm trying to set myself up to do it this way so that it's easier for me to do. I'll be more motivated to do it. And all of this of being a partner, talking out loud, helps them see behind the curtain. And so just to go with like that Wizard of Oz thing, it's presenting over and then looking behind the curtain, but showing behind the curtain, you're not protecting them from the realities of the world by putting up a facade. And this can start as early as 6 years old. So I just saw, I was watching Bob's Burger, and there was an episode where Gene was asking for math help. And Bob just is sitting there. He's like, I have no idea how to do this. It's very difficult, right? How many parents, though, are like, let me pull out my phone, let me look it up, let me pretend that I know how to do
Right.
it? What I say the best coaching, and this is something so it's easy for parents to do. You encounter an academic problem, you don't know how to do it, say, I have no idea. You guys are learning something in a different way than I've ever learned
Which
it.
is so true today.
But how they're doing like adding, subtracting, multiplying, I don't get it.
Mind blowing.
But that digress. That's a whole different
Yes,
podcast.
we'll do another one.
But focusing on, well, what now that I don't know how to do it, let's talk through. Let's model some role model some problem solving. Who would know how to solve this? Well, my teacher would. Okay. Do we want to send them an email? What's email? I've never sent an email. Can't tell you. I get middle schoolers never. My mom emails my teachers. Well, why can't you? Let's email them together. Well, no, the homework's due tomorrow. Okay. What else can we do? And then they sit there, right? I don't know. Well, what I might do is maybe let's Google it. Let's try to figure out what is this unit called? How do we look it up? What are we doing? So now you're both being humble that you don't know something. You're modeling that not everyone knows everything, right? It's okay to not know. Now you're modeling how to problem solve and navigate through it. And so I think the biggest mindset shift for parents is if you present perfection, you're setting up an ideal they'll never be able to attain, and so they never try. It comes so easy for them. It's so hard for me. Why even try?
It's really powerful. And I will warn parents, to be honest, that what you're describing, super effective. I've been trying it out too. And it takes so much more pause and thinking and effort and time. And I think that's another thing that works against us as parents. It's so much faster to just look up an answer and give an answer, right? That we lose. And maybe in certain instances, that's just what needs to happen. But definitely finding those moments where you can take the time to ask a series of questions versus just give the answer. It does not come naturally, I think, to many of us, but it is really, really, really powerful. Just quickly, I'll share an anecdote because I think I accidentally did recently what you're describing, but I'm not going to take credit for it because it was not intentional. I am historically incredibly organized. I have excellent, I will brag, executive function skills, but life is just kind of overwhelming and kicking my butt right now. So I've been very scattered and a million tabs open in my brain. I'm not functioning like myself. So one day, I was running around doing a million things. I had an armful of things that needed to be put away in various places of the house. One of the things in my hand was my phone. For 2 hours, my phone was lost within the house. And at first it was like cute and funny and like, oh, I can't find my phone. And then I started to like, you know how you panic when you can't find your phone, right? Like, how do I live without this? I work on it. It's expensive to replace. So I start really freaking out. I mean, 2 hours is a long time. And I did. I went to my son and I was like, dude, I need your help. Like, I'm really starting to freak out. It's in the house. And he came up with, if this had been his situation, he would not have had all these ideas because his brain would have been hijacked. He would have been freaking out, but we were reversed now. I was freaking out and his brain was functioning. And he said, well, let's ping it and let's do this and I'll call it. Of course it was on silent, so that didn't work, but great for coming up with the idea. And then he goes, well, you think they're not listening. He goes, let's retrace your steps. When do you remember having it? What were you doing? And I was like, right. Yeah. Retrace the step. Cause he loses everything. He would lose this out if it wasn't attached. And we retraced some things. We weren't finding it. Long story, not short. It was in the freezer because one of the things I had in my hand was an ice pack. Actually, I had 2 ice packs and they were on top of my phone. And I just went like this and just tossed everything in. So it had shut itself down. I thought it was broken. It ended up being fine. And not only was he so proud that he had helped me solve this, but he got such a kick out of the fact that I did this highly disorganized, thing. He told everyone. And old me probably would have been embarrassed about that. But I was like so cute to see him be, and I could tell internally he was going like, oh, look, she's not perfect. She messes up too. And it went on a really long time.
That probably did wonders to remove the stigma on it.
I think it did.
It's so much, there's so much emotion tied to these struggles, and just being able to relate with you,
Yeah.
tease about it, talk about it, ripped off a major band-aid, I'm sure,
I
of
think so.
now when I lose things, I don't have to be ashamed of it. My mom loses things too, but I can be rational in solving it, just like I help my mom. Or the other great way, I lost something, I'm freaking out, I'm not thinking clearly. Let me go get a rational partner to help me out on solving it.
Right.
Two great strategies that come from that. And that was all done just through action. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't words. It wasn't, hey, we can figure out solving things through these strategies. It was a real display of that.
Yeah. And I was grateful that it played out the way that it did. Maybe I will do it intentionally in the future. But
He'll
look
catch
for,
on. He sounds smart enough to be able to sniff that out.
He is wicked smart. But yes, parents, look for the intentional and unintentional opportunities. This has been amazing. I have one last question for you. I think we could talk forever. For you personally, not as a coach or a professional, but just as a person, what's one thing you've learned on either your own learning journey or your coaching journey that maybe we haven't touched on yet, that you just wish that you had discovered sooner, come to sooner, learn sooner, that you want parents or maybe just even students to know now?
So, really, towards parents, and this is for everyone, but whenever you're helping someone else, sometimes the best help you can give is just by asking questions. My favorite ideal coaching session is if I can just ask questions the entire time. And the real learning for me through coaching was many of the people that I've worked with have all the answers. They just don't have the connections yet made in their head to access them. And that's so empowering. By asking questions and helping guide someone to the answers in their own head, now they're not reliant on you. You're just helping them achieve things. The one other thing that I do also just like to really emphasize about what I've learned, like I am not a parent. My understanding of the parent-child relation, I have the benefit of being very objective on the outside and working with people. I had a economic development professor, who told me that the oldest form of insurance, of retirement insurance, has been around forever, humans, and it's having kids. You have more kids in the hopes that one of them will live long enough to take care of you when you get older.
Right.
And I say this to like make lighthearted, but the parent-child relationship is inherently emotional. And what I've learned through my work is society has moved this relationship from being really an emotional, values-based relationship to a more functional one. Get the homeworks in, do this, do this. And so what I sometimes share to parents is just for like my own learning and for their learning, I can make this stuff sound easy. It can come across as sounding easy. I've learned and lived and breathed this for 11 years.
Yeah.
So when I present it over, it's not to present over, hey, it's easy, just do it.
Right.
It's to give some roadmap for some things to do, but sometimes you're just not the best person to do it. And I think that's important for parents to pick and choose those battles. But if you're struggling doing this, you're not doing something wrong. And it's just been from that very objective side, what I've learned through this is you'll never be able to put those emotions aside, and you shouldn't feel bad that you can't.
If we could, it would probably be really bad.
It would be terrible. And that's why, like, when I share these things, what I've learned is I know parents want to help so much and let me find all these ways. But what I've learned again, from the outside, not being a parent myself, looking at my own mom and what I really rely on her for, sometimes kids just want a mom or a dad that doesn't view them as a problem, but just listens to them as an individual. And understanding what, like, that each one's unique. And as a parent, you sometimes need to just say, do they need mom right now, or do they need a coach? And can I be the coach? Maybe not.
Yeah.
And being humble through this and through all of that.
That's so great. That's a really good one, and we haven't had that yet. Uh, this has been amazing, super valuable. Clearly, I will need to have you back.
I'm glad I could talk about this forever, so
I know,
I'd be
me
glad to
too.
be back.
I think we're both geeking out about this, but I really hope that somebody, that everybody's getting something, some takeaways, some valuable things today. Thank you so much for joining me. Listeners, parents, I'll be back soon with more stuff that I wish and others wish that we knew sooner. In the meantime, I will leave you with my list of stuff that I learned the hardest way, which is accept help when it's offered, ask for it when it isn't. You are the expert on your child, so trust your gut. And if you need to be the squeaky wheel. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back soon.
Thank you.